Hi everyone, Michelle here with Keller Williams Realty, and today I am joined by James Guittard. He is from FBC Group and actually my own personal accountant. And of course, with tax time coming around, it just made sense that we had this discussion with James today. So thank you for coming on, James. We appreciate it. You're welcome. In terms of just a quick recap of the real estate market, so we do have the April numbers in, and it's pretty interesting. So we will find that in terms of new listings, no surprise there, new listings are down by 64.1%. In terms of house prices, which is the question that I get a lot, the home prices have actually somewhat just remained the same. So overall, if we look at the number crunching, we've gone up 0.1%, so from 820,000 up to 821,000, which is really great to see, just in terms of the fact that we're in a worldwide pandemic, and Toronto and the GTA have still somewhat held their prices. So yeah, that keep in mind that is for all home prices, so that's a big general section there, but that's what we're seeing overall. I will delve into it a little bit more next week. Now, taxes. When we go into the fact that it's tax season, I think one of the biggest questions people are asking is all about what happens for my my 2020 tax deadline and all of that. So James, I'm going to ask that. What about the 2020 tax deadline?
Well, for individuals, the ones who had to file by April 30th, they got extended to June 1st for the filing, and then September 1st for paying. So they have a couple months for filing, and then a couple more months for filing. Self-employed, a little misconception here. A lot of people keep thinking the deadline's been extended, but it's still June 15th for self-employed people, sole proprietors, like their tax returns, but the payment has been extended, same as individuals, like non-businesses, has been extended to September 1st as well. So but CRA, there's been some confusion there where they might say one thing in a stump speech by a politician, and it's not officially on CRA's website. Penalties are one of the things that people have been talking about, where am I going to be penalized if I don't file? What if I file late? My bookkeeping's behind, or whatever the case is, I'm busy dealing with other stuff. And they've mentioned that as long as the deadlines are, as long as the payments are made by the payment deadline, then they're not charging a penalty for filing late. So for individuals self-employed, a lot of it has to do with March 27th onward. So if you had a filing deadline of March, or tax owing or filing deadline of after March 27th, so March 31st, which would be the first one, which is a lot of times HST for partnerships, then they've been extended, same as the others. The HST returns, they've allowed it to go to June 30th. So HST is similar to a sole proprietor. It's June 15th, but April 30th is the payment. So everyone would think, okay, I'll just make sure I pay it by June 15th when I have to file it. And no, they start charging interest as of April 30th, same as sole proprietors. So a self-employed individual, June 15th, they know they have a June 15th deadline. And then when they get their tax bill, they pay in May or June, they get their tax bill, and they see a little bit of a difference from what they were told, a couple $100, $50, whatever. They just chalk it up to, oh, maybe I miswrote the number, and then they pay it. And they don't realize on the notice of assessment it's going to show installment interest or just interest for not having paid by that April 30th deadline. So HST, they've extended to June 30th, and they didn't change the filing deadline, June 15th, because that's the deadline for filing. But for some reason, they said you still have to file by June 15th, but we won't charge you penalty as long as you pay us by June 30th. So it's kind of a disconnect there, why didn't they just make it June 30th filing deadline? I guess they just didn't want to. But they did say they will not impose penalties or interest as long as they get their money by June 30th for that HST or September 1st for sole proprietors and individuals.
Okay. All right. So those are the 2 dates to remember, essentially. Okay. In terms of landlords and tenants, of course, there are a lot of landlords now that may have tenants that are not able to pay their rents. And we have in other weeks talked about the mortgage deferrals that you can go ahead and apply for. But in the meantime, there is a landlord and tenant relief program, correct?
Yeah, the Emergency Act, where there can be a reduction, a subsidy of 75% to the tenant.
Okay, so this is a subsidy to the tenant.
Yeah, the way that works is you have to show that you have a 70% drop in revenue, first of all. So I think the other programs are closer to 30%. 70% drop in activity, depending on the time frame. So 70% prior year or the same period, so April, May, June. And if you, but the problem is, I've seen some businesses who didn't operate last year. They're new. They might have started in July, or they're going up. Just they're a new business, so they have low revenue last year and they're going up, but now they just suddenly drop 90%, but that 10% is still higher than last year. So it kind of, what they did was they allowed, there were some complaints when the rules came out, and they extended it to the average of January, February as well. So if you were closer, the closer months where your income could have been established at a baseline, then they'll allow you to compare it to last year or to the first 2 months of this calendar year.
Okay.
So 70% drop. Can't be a large landlord like Walmart. It has to have 50,000 or less of rent, gross rent. The program, unless they changed it, didn't apply to TMI, taxes, maintenance, and insurance. It was just basically the net rent. So some people are okay with that because they have one big rent payment, and the landlord covers that. But there are some people who have large TMI that isn't factored into that. So when you take a percentage discount of a percentage of your total rental costs, it actually turns into a lot less than the intended benefit. So and it's a dance between the landlord and the tenant. The landlord applies for it, and what happens is, in the end, the government wants the tenant to pay 25% of the rent, which is how you get the 75% subsidy. The landlord covers 25% of that subsidy, basically. So they're losing 25% of the rent they would have collected anyway, and the government's giving a 50% forgivable loan to the landlord. So that's how 50% forgivable loan. So the landlord is really on the hook for 75 minus the 50% that is forgivable. But the rules haven't even been written yet on how that's forgivable. So there could be exclusions to that, or conditions or circumstances that might make the landlord be out more. Who knows? Until the government actually passes a bill, we won't know. And the website's not even up yet.
Right.
So the dance between the landlord and tenant is going to be, well, if the landlord knows the tenant spent a fortune on leasehold improvements, well, then they don't have an incentive to give that tenant 25% out of their own pocket, because they know that tenant can't afford to lose the place because they spend $50,000 or $100,000 fixing up the place. Or you might have a tenant who has no assets, very minimal assets, and can afford, and either it's a new business or established, but it's just revenue coming in every month, and they can get away with closing shop and moving on, because with a corporation, bankruptcy is always an option depending on circumstances. So it's going to be up to the landlords and tenants to come to some kind of agreement where they're both accepting some of the loss, I guess.
And that really goes for commercial.
Sorry,
But what about residential?
Oh, sorry, that was commercial?
Yeah.
For residential, it's just they've closed the eviction. I'm not even sure what the name is, the eviction board. You can't evict someone right now, probably for a few months. I'm not sure if there's a hard deadline or if they just close the offices until they decide to open them.
Yeah, they're closed.
The only real option for them, as far as I know, is the mortgage payment deferrals, which isn't, well, first of all, you're not losing the payments. You still have to pay it in the end, and you're getting interest on top of that. So your interest is almost compounding. So the landlord would really be out, and then it's up to the landlord to come to an agreement with the tenant, because what happens if this is 3-4 months and the tenant owes $5,000, maybe $10,000, depending on if it's a couple thousand a month in some locations, and then they have to get that money from the person at some point. You're not losing the payment, you're just deferring the payment, whether it's the landlord deferring their mortgage payment or the tenant deferring their rental payment. Is that tenant going to stay in that place and pay a few $100s every month to pay back that loan, almost, if you think of it as a loan? That's going to be a decision between the landlord tenant, and that tenant can just leave if they, maybe it'll hurt their credit rating, or they could get sued. Who knows? But there's going to be the best scenario is to negotiate either case. Have a good relationship with your landlord or with your tenant, and make sure that whoever you can come out as with minimal pain as possible.
Yeah, that's the best bet. And I guess last but not least is, does any of this, in terms of the relief program, do we know how that's going to affect taxes for next year?
Not for the tenant portion, because that hasn't even been, the rules haven't even been announced. As an example, this came up the other day. Initially, they announced that it was mortgage. You had to have a mortgage on the commercial property in order to use this program. Then they said, well, you're screwing over landlords who paid their property in full over years or with cash. So why are they losing out? So the government said, okay, we're going to allow that as an option, but we'll tell you what the rules are later. They haven't come up with the rules yet. So there's certain things about taxability for the relief program for the commercial rent, where is it going to be a taxable benefit? I don't think so, but it could be, because you're getting a benefit of some kind, or in the end it could be you're just only claiming the expense that you actually incurred. On the personal side, the CERB, the Emergency Relief Benefit, that's for individuals and sole proprietors, where you can make up to $1,000. That's just straight taxable income. So there's nothing unusual about that. The only difference is if you get $8,000 over 4 months, which is the limit right now, you're not getting tax taken off. So if you had a large, if you're a realtor, for example, where you had closings in January or February, and then maybe towards the end of the year, you'll have lots of closings as well if the market recovers, that $8,000 will be fully taxable, just like everything else. And it might not be factored into your installment payments if you're making installment payments. Same as an employee getting laid off, where they might be making $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 a year. They end up getting the CERB because they're on short-term leave from the company because the company's not open. And then they end up with filing their taxes next year, when the average or the usual person might only have a little bit of payable, a little bit of refund, and they end up with $8,000 of additional income that was never taxed. And that could be, lowest bracket is 20%. So that could be hundreds of dollars, if not thousands, depending on your tax bracket. So people need to manage their money in this circumstance. They need to live off, obviously, but manage their money in the short term, knowing that it's fully taxable. It's and it's also at audit risk. So CRA is not asking questions right now. I had 2 people apply, and it was so easy to apply. It was literally 3 minutes to get it. You just got to answer 2 or 3 questions, and the problem is they're not really qualifying people other than a question. So what happens if next year they start sending out letters to people asking for proof of income, proof that you qualified? So they could ask for bank statements, maybe they could ask for T-slips or whatever, or they might want to know, when did you get that money? Because if you received $50,000 in income in January, February, and then nothing in March, April, May, well, you qualify for the $2,000 CERB because you're not receiving income in those months. But what if you had a little bit of income? Well, if they deny it, well, then you have to repay that money most likely. They haven't talked about that, but a lot of people are thinking, hey, this is easy money. Well, they could always claw it back. If it's not just the tax on it is the worst case. The worst case is, what if they want their full $2,000 or $8,000 back, and there's penalties and interest because you didn't qualify, and it was your obligation because you were the one answering the questions, attesting to the circumstances you were under. Yeah. So people need to stay on top of that.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense. And you know what? You just have to be responsible. Make sure you qualify, right? That makes absolute sense. Thank you so much for all of the information. That was very, very helpful. I think people have a lot of questions based on this because there are so many different avenues where I don't know, I guess different information or different fields of information is being said, and we just don't know all the time what's right and what's not correct. So thank you for that. Thank you for your time. And once again, if you have any more questions, I will be happy to answer for next week. And James, thanks for coming on board, and everyone else, stay healthy and safe. Bye.
Thanks, Michelle.
Thanks.